Let's walk you through this really quick. Overnight, the president slaps 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports.
That continues against the president's tariffs from China, Mexico, and Canada. Also, businesses that say they'd be hurt badly as well, including those in the auto industry.
There has been a dramatic reversal in U.S.-Mexican economic relations after President Trump's protectionist tariffs on Mexican goods. The Mexican response can destabilize America's automotive industry. In a measured step, Mexico has dislocated the complex supply chain arrangement that is at the foundation of American vehicle production, opening the way for a broad economic war. Prior to continuing our analysis, please activate the notification system by engaging with the subscription interface. For decades, the automotive industries of both nations have maintained an interdependent relationship. Domestic vehicle manufacturers have consistently relied upon Mexican facilities for essential automotive components, encompassing electrical distribution systems, transmission units, and complete powertrain assemblies. There are a variety of factors explaining why Mexico has been so prominently engaged in North American automotive production, including cheap wages, factory bases, and access to U.S. markets. The balance of power has shifted. Mexico isn't just responding, it's striking where it hurts the most. A calculated counterattack now threatens to paralyze the heart of America's auto industry. Buckle up, things are about to get intense. Mexico's strategic retaliation. In a strong and determinative response to Trump's tariffs, Mexico retaliated with a forceful and intense counterattack, which cast a very large cloud of uncertainty over the economic appeal and overall feasibility of this vitally important bilateral relationship between the two countries. Due to the tariffs, the nation acted by instituting a range of retaliatory actions expressly intended to counteract and neutralize the effects of these tariffs. Among the most significant responses on the part of Mexico was the strategic move to shut off the importation of key auto parts that serve a critical function in the operations and manufacturing activities within the United States. In taking this dramatic step, Mexico initiated a well-planned and strategically directed program with the express intention of placing maximum pressure on the American economy in a wide variety of ways. That this objective was, in fact, realized through the intentional and targeted disruption of auto supply chains, which are absolutely vital to the overall smooth operations of the entire motor vehicle industry, made this particular retaliation not only a non-random occurrence, but rather a well-considered plan that was especially directed against one of America's most significant industrial foundations, thereby radically raising the stakes in this escalating economic conflict. In stark contrast with most other business sectors that possess the intrinsic ability to easily change and move to other suppliers without much effect, the automobile sector is in a very specialized system of production. This system demands an exceedingly accurate coordination of timing in order to run effectively and efficiently. Specifically, factories in Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky are very reliant on the timely receipt of daily shipments of essential parts imported from Mexico. If these essential parts are abruptly denied to them, the assembly lines in these factories must cease operating immediately, which creates enormous operational disruptions in the entire production process. This not only results in the idling of workers, but also creates severe economic dislocation that can impact the broader community on a large scale. A ticking time bomb has been set. Mexico's retaliation is about to send shockwaves through America's auto industry. Factories on the brink, supply chains in chaos. How soon before the industry grinds to a halt? Consequence for U.S. auto manufacturers. The strategic action taken by Mexico will have immediate ripple effects that will be felt throughout the domestic auto industry essentially immediately, and this will most likely occur within a period of days. Production factories, which currently have only low inventory buffers, are going to be staring at acute shortages of parts that were being sourced from Mexico previously, subjecting their operations to extreme difficulty. Major automakers, such as large corporations like Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, each of which has established huge manufacturing plants in both Mexico and the United States, are now on the verge of shutting down their production lines entirely, because of these unforeseen developments. Dealerships that are already stretched to keep up with their existing inventory limitations will be even more difficult in addressing the higher consumer demand that will be caused by the reduced supply of newer cars. On top of that, vehicle prices that are at record high levels already are expected to increase even further down the road. Apart from direct production impacts, financial markets are betting on disastrous outcomes. Investors, already skeptical about the economic impact of tariffs, are preparing for plunging share prices of major automakers. The uncertainty that accompanies the supply chain is expected to cause panic among the stakeholders of businesses, leading to massive selling activities that will traverse various sectors of business. Those sectors are most directly associated with the automobile manufacturing industry, which entails vital parts such as steel, electronic parts, and logistics services that facilitate the whole process. Financial experts are foreseeing the grim possibility of this process escalating further, turning into one of the most disastrous trade wars that we have witnessed in recent times. Political ramifications. This has profound political implications. While Trump's tariffs were designed to bully Mexico into renegotiating bilateral trade agreements on terms more favorable to the United States, Mexico's retaliatory tariffs have reversed the negotiating dynamic. The burden has unexpectedly fallen on United States auto workers, many of whom previously supported Trump's economic agenda, who now face the threat of mass unemployment. The government stands to suffer potentially catastrophic consequences from the political commotion as corporate executives and trade unions demand swift action to cushion economic losses. Relations between the two nations are already at an all-time high level of tension. In his defense of the use of tariffs for his trade measures, Trump says that tariffs are necessary actions in defending American employment opportunities. Mexico's countermeasures reveal hidden vulnerabilities in international trade as both countries wage a heated economic war, neither willing to yield. US leaders are confronted with a tough decision: ratchet up tensions with higher tariffs and restrictions, or pursue rapid conflict resolution before irreparable damage is inflicted. The auto sector is both the backbone and the force behind technological innovation in the US economy. Over the span of decades, the interconnected webs of supply throughout the United States, Mexico, and Canada evolved through calculated planning to produce optimal efficiency at minimal cost. Any disruption of this complex machinery threatens not just regional monetary stability, but also the competitive position of American automobile manufacturers in the world's markets. Chronic breakdowns in production would push operations like Tesla's and Rivian's, which are now running close to their supply network limits, onto impossible ground. As American manufacturers seek substitute component suppliers, the strategic value of Mexico increases. Shifting domestic production to locations here would involve major capital investment and lengthy schedules. Throughout North America, Mexican suppliers have specialty niches with unique know-how and facilities not available anywhere else. Even temporary breakdowns would lead to permanent industry consequences. Mexico stands strong, knowing its considerable bargaining power in trade negotiations. While extremely dependent on American exportation, Mexico has diversified its commercial relationships over the past few years. Enhanced alliances with China, the European Union, and South American countries have provided Mexico with an escape route. In contrast, the United States is seriously handicapped when it comes to addressing the challenge of restructuring its supply chains following Mexican disapproval. Mexico isn't just fighting back, it's rewriting global trade rules. As America scrambles for solutions, could this be the turning point that shifts economic power forever? Broader economic implications. The crisis goes beyond the boundaries of automobile manufacturing. The broader industrial economy, reliant on bilateral free trade agreements, is in more jeopardy. Agricultural producers responsible for billions of Mexican shipments fear retaliatory measures that would devastate domestic farm enterprises. Retailers already suffering from inflationary tensions and supply chain malfunctions fear that higher auto prices will reduce spending overall. economic implications will filter beyond automaker production into employment rates, consumer confidence, and broader economic indicators. Even diplomatic ties are strained by this conflict. Watchful nations may reconsider their American trade relationships if Trump's tariff policy proves too volatile. Traditionally, dependent trade partners may switch to more reliable trade relations. Mexico's resistance to American pressure may prompt other nations to be resolute in the face of protectionism. This conflict's broader implications could reshape global commerce trends for the next several years. As tensions escalate, industry experts, economists, and policymakers signal with alarm the dangers of protracted conflict. The refusal of Mexico's countermeasures is directly linked to mounting damage to both economies. American manufacturers initially welcomed protectionist policy, but then were trapped in a devastating circle of rising prices and declining profitability. The same jobs Trump sought to save now became potential casualties in a conflict that neither side could afford to lose. Milliseconds of dread held millions of American auto workers in its clutches. Factory workers, engineers, sales representatives, and supply chain planners were subjected to radical political moves. Their salaries depended on emergency resolution. A sector that contributed to American economic prosperity for over a century was being threatened to be disestablished. The debate started regarding whether this trade clash would unleash irreversible reorientation in global economic forces. With time, the momentum for crisis mitigation increased. The United States and Mexico had to walk a tightrope toward de-escalation before harm became irreversible. Through diplomatic negotiation, provisional waiver, or complete policy reversal. The need for compromise had never been more imperative. The automobile industry and both nations' economies hung in the balance, awaiting the next move in a game of high stakes with no victors. Mexico's rearguard was beginning to tell, but its impact was impossible to miss. Decades of operating a highly efficient supply chain had left the motor industry in its last dying gasps. Each passing day was propelling American car makers deeper into a working meltdown, facing hard decisions that would forever alter the industry landscape. With factories closing down across America, motor manufacturers' top priority of the day became damage limitation. Millions of half-finished automobiles filled assembly floors, awaiting crucial Mexican components. Plant managers struggled to locate substitute suppliers, but this was not easy. The intricacy of much auto inventory made plant relocation not only expensive, but often impossible in the short term. The domino effect echoed down the entire chain. Suppliers, trucking firms, logistics companies, and dealerships prepared for economic devastation that could take years to bounce back from. The major concern was the financial blow dealt to car makers. Every hour of lost production equated to millions of dollars in lost revenue. The largest US automakers operated on extremely small profit margins, where profitability hung on being able to make a high volume of vehicles. Idled plants drove costs up, regardless of the balance of completed unit sales. Companies that had spent decades honing manufacturing processes found themselves in the grips of one of the most tumultuous crises in history. The economic toll was just as devastating. Thousands of automobile workers saw temporary furloughs and outright job annihilation as companies struggled with supply shortages. In Michigan and Ohio, where the automobile industry was the cornerstone of regional economies, families saw economic uncertainty. Entire cities that depended on secure employment from automobile plants and parts facilities anxiously waited out a solution before permanent economic damage was incurred. For ordinary American consumers, the crisis was experienced as record-high prices on vehicles and dwindling inventory. Automobile dealerships, already experiencing supply shortages as a result of previous global interference, now face an even more severe dilemma. Prices on new cars soared as demand significantly exceeded supply, pricing many consumers out of the market. Used car prices, which had been gradually decreasing after post-pandemic inflation, began to increase again as consumers in distress sought alternatives. Leasing companies, rental companies, and ride-sharing companies could not afford new vehicles and were therefore subjected to additional economic strain outside the auto industry. Mexico's policy shift in economics is a powerful signal about the shifting power dynamics of North America. For decades, the United States has been the trade negotiation behemoth, but this counter-move demonstrates the limits of doing so. Mexico's participation in the auto supply chain creates a unique leverage to challenge US policy, compelling Washington to re-examine the effectiveness of its economic policy. Other trading partners watch and observe how Mexico's retaliation holds sufficient weight to set a new precedent for trade tensions with America. Washington's response is one of haste and confusion. The Trump administration, having overestimated Mexico's willingness to fight back, is now under great pressure to de-escalate the crisis. Political operators scramble to create a plan that allows settlement without appearing to back down. The very foundation of Trump's economic policy, asserting superiority in trade talks, has now been subject to a test that would make it politically costly to back down. The administration must decide whether to double down on tariffs and risk further destabilizing the economy, or go for a diplomatic exit that will avoid further escalation. Mexico's administration, however, remains firm in its stance, with international trade blocs hanging in the balance. Mexico has been investing years in developing alternative alliances with other countries besides the United States, even as the US remains its largest trading partner. Mexico's expanded ties with China, the European Union, and South American economies provide some economic buffer that did not exist in earlier decades. This makes its retaliatory strike even more powerful, as Mexico knows it has economic destinations outside sheer American dependence. The longer the standoff, Mexico can even resort to the buildup of these other trade alliances, further undermining the United States' hold in the region. The business community reacts with growing alarm. Senior executives of the major automakers call on the government to halt the crisis before it spirals totally out of control. Managers warn that extended supply chain disruptions can do permanent damage, leading companies to reconsider long-term investment strategies. Some manufacturers begin looking for ways to relocate production elsewhere, to Canada or even Asia, but those moves would take years of planning and billions invested in infrastructure. The reality is that in the short term, Mexico is part of the US auto chain. Systemic market volatility caused by uncertainty on Wall Street means stock prices of large auto manufacturers, parts makers, and allied industry stocks plunge. Investors who are worried about the long-term impact on corporate bottom lines begin selling auto stocks, which causes the market to stumble and bleed over into non-auto related areas. The financial markets, already on edge over global economic shifts, react badly to the prospect of a prolonged trade war with Mexico and trigger fears of a broader slowdown in the economy. Consumer confidence begins to collapse as the crisis worsens. The risk of economic uncertainty translates to the fact that consumers begin altering spending patterns as Americans reduce expenditures, anticipating job loss or inflation. The retail market feels the direct brunt as uncertainty takes over the market. Credit markets are also under pressure as banks reevaluate lending policies in industries closely linked to the auto sector. The very scale of the current economic crisis meets America's profound dependence on consolidated distribution chains and demonstrates the vulnerability that comes with their disruption. The world watches as Mexico's position in world politics strengthens, positioning itself as a model to other nations victimized by American trade coercion. Countries that were previously intimidated by US tariffs now turn to Mexico's strategy as a viable blueprint for resistance against economic extortion. China and other economic powerhouses are following developments intently, analyzing whether the same diplomatic tactics could effectively address future US trade policy. Mexico's diplomatic gambit has far-reaching implications beyond the auto industry into geopolitics in general. The action is a sign of a new paradigm for international relations with US economic policy. There are still tensions, but back-channel negotiations persist in searching for solutions. The bilateral negotiators balance possible concessions against one another under the pressure of reaching mutually acceptable solutions. Mexican officials are seeking guarantees against future economic coercion, and US policymakers must win public confidence by demonstrating firmness against external pressure. This tightrope act prolongs the crisis because neither side wishes to appear weak at home. Auto manufacturers have critical choices to make under growing uncertainty. Some companies accelerate strategic relocation plans, aiming to bring some of the manufacturing processes onto US soil despite the lengthy period of implementation. Others seek short-term alternatives, like diversification of foreign component sourcing at a greater expense. The sector goes through a tricky transition period, aware that even the end of the crisis cannot directly restore the foundation of trust between US and Mexican trade partners. At a political level, automotive issues move into the spotlight of national debates. Congressmen, particularly those whose constituencies are the primary manufacturing centers, demand prompt action to halt further decline. Some members of the legislature propose lowering tariffs to return trade relations to equilibrium, while others advocate retaliatory action against Mexico on a strong scale. Others frame these basic ideological divisions in the US government between economic realism and protectionist trade policy. With delays in passage, stakes increase exponentially. Economic costs mount by billions of dollars in foregone production, and hundreds of thousands of jeopardized jobs that put the long-term sustainability of automotive cross-border supply chains in question. Each passing day that the situation is not alleviated compounds existing issues, rendering eventual recovery only harder. Mexico's diplomatic trick has put it as a power in North American commerce. In pointing to the importance of its manufacturing industry to the US economy, Mexico has forced Washington to rethink its economic diplomacy strategy. Although long-term policy implications are uncertain, Mexico's move has fundamentally changed both sides' bilateral trade relations to be felt in years to come. The mounting US-Mexico car trade war exposed vulnerabilities within North American supply chains' cohesion and stoked grander arguments concerning globalization, national economic sovereignty, and the unexpected implications of aggressive trade policy. As the ripple effects of economic shock spread, Mexico's long-term implications of diplomatic efforts are increasingly revealed, forcing policymakers, industry, and consumers to confront unpleasant realities. Immediate issues remain unresolved. American automakers are still struggling with acute parts shortages, as decades-old supply chains are effectively crippled. The industry, which has perfected just-in-time manufacturing concepts, now faces the dangers of over-reliance on foreign suppliers. Sector leaders openly wonder if basic production strategies need to be rewritten. Practicalities complicate speedy resolution, though. While theoretical relocation is feasible domestically, constructing new factory complexes, retraining staff, and restructuring logistics infrastructure costs enormous amounts over the years. Meanwhile, in the past, speedy economic damage accumulates. The auto sector's staff shortage deteriorates daily. Thousands of workers remain furloughed without compensation, with increasingly unstable financial circumstances as weeks become months. Unlike previous economic downturns characterized by market-induced layoffs, this crisis is policy-induced alone. Policymakers in the government are increasingly lambasted by workers and unions, and demonstrations erupt outside shuttered manufacturing facilities in Detroit, Toledo, and Louisville, with labor leaders demanding action now to prevent long-term economic damage. Pressure mounts on the White House administration. Mexico is facing the same crisis with a position that proves stronger than anticipated. Preemptive concerns over sudden economic hardship upon the cessation of US exports proved unnecessary in Mexico's industrial centers, particularly Monterrey, Guam, and Puebla, whose regional economy is fueled by the manufacture of automotive components. Mexican authorities had already anticipated this confrontation prior to Trump's unleashing of tariffs and had initiated preliminary discussions with European and Asian auto vehicle manufacturers regarding plans for diversification of supply chains. A surprise twist occurred as German, South Korean, and Japanese companies emerged to buy Mexican auto parts initially destined for US markets, thereby insulating some economic impacts on Mexico's manufacturing sector. This reorientation transcends short-term economic readjustment. It is a fundamental shift in world trade patterns. Mexico, traditionally America's junior partner in North American trade agreements, is emerging as a standalone player in the global market through more vigorous European and Asian trade relationships, reducing its dependence on the United States, a development Washington did not anticipate. While short-term effects are questionable, this trend can chip away at America's economic domination of its neighbor to the south in the longer term, fundamentally shifting regional power balances. In Washington, tensions build over the most effective response to Mexico's retaliation. Hardline administration aides call for stronger retaliatory actions than have so far been under consideration, including the imposition of additional tariffs, more stringent import restraints, or even threatening to abandon existing trade agreements altogether. But this course is resolutely opposed by business leaders, economists, and members of Trump's own party who recognize the danger of self-inflicted injury from heightened tensions. Treasury officials and trade advisors with close ties to the automotive industry are calling for de-escalation within the administration. Their argument is that prolonging the standoff will not restore American jobs. It will merely drive automakers to seek production alternatives outside US and Mexican borders, further reducing domestic manufacturing capacity. Amidst conflicting pressures, the White House is hard-pressed to devise a response that balances economic pragmatism and political necessity. The dilemma is clear. Withdrawal would embarrass the administration's tough-on-trade stance, while holding firm risks, unleashing blanket economic mayhem. Efforts at resolution are hampered by the fact that Mexico, having already disrupted US auto production, has little near-term incentive to yield without securing meaningful concessions. Meanwhile, consumer behavior undergoes an unexpected transformation as vehicle production slows dramatically. Americans extend ownership of current vehicles beyond typical intervals rather than purchasing new ones at excessive prices. Auto repair businesses see record-breaking demand boosts as buyers seek to extend vehicle life rather than purchasing new vehicles. The second-hand car market, already under pressure from shortages of supply, is facing record-high inflationary pressures. Leasing companies, normally replacing fleets every 2 years, are having to stretch use over intended lifetimes, requiring more maintenance and higher operating expenses. All areas of transportation infrastructure are touched, with impacts radiating far beyond the automakers themselves. As the crisis drags on, global pressure mounts to end it. The European Union and Japan joined the fray with strong interests in North American automobile production. European automakers with Mexican factories, including Volkswagen and BMW, urged diplomatic action to stabilize the supply chain. Canada, whose auto industry has strong ties to both US and Mexican markets, attempts mediation in the form of compromise proposals. But the strongly dug-in positions of both governments render compromise ever more difficult. The unfolding crisis has triggered a record rush to automation throughout the auto sector, profoundly transforming traditional models of manufacturing. As global political tensions are escalating, weaknesses in human workforces have emerged as an urgent problem, prompting automakers to invest extensively in advanced robotics and artificial intelligence systems. This strategic shift represents a deliberate attempt to reduce dependence on global supply chain networks, which have grown increasingly susceptible to disruption in the context of geopolitical uncertainty. There is a profound paradox in this scenario. Protectionist trade policies that were originally intended to safeguard American manufacturing job opportunities now appear to be inadvertently driving job displacement by increased adoption of automation. Economic analysts, viewing the broad context of the escalating trade war crisis, observe that the crisis has evolved into a far more complex issue than was originally anticipated. What began as a straightforward tariff dispute has evolved into a multifaceted economic war, reflecting the tangled interdependence of contemporary international commerce and the unparalleled challenge of rapidly disentangling long-established international trade relationships. The crisis has reached a boiling point, prompting the initiation of intensive diplomatic negotiations between Mexican and US officials. These clandestine discussions take place at a time of mounting pressure from corporate management, union circles, and foreign trade partners. Mexico, after successfully demonstrating its strategic importance to the US auto industry, has signaled that it is willing to converse, but solely on its own narrowly defined terms. Concurrently, the United States faces a crucial decision-making moment regarding its future economic trajectory. Whether to maintain aggressive protectionist policies despite potential adverse consequences, or acknowledge the superior effectiveness of cooperation in today's interconnected global economy. At present, there exist no straightforward solutions to this complex situation. This metamorphosis of the conflict into a full-scale trade war of unprecedented consequences bodes very poorly for the once mighty American auto sector, which constituted the keystone of American industrial strength. Now, it hovers at the edge of destruction. Mexico has played its economic trump card, and it has emerged as an exponentially more powerful global player. The world waits with bated breath as both nations grapple with this crisis, one that will determine the trajectory of North American trade relations for generations to come. The stakes have never been higher. America's auto empire teeters on the brink, and Mexico holds all the cards. Will this be the breaking point that reshapes global trade forever? The future of US-Mexico trade relations. Regardless of the final outcome, one underlying fact has emerged. This crisis has irreversibly altered the old paradigms of global commerce. Car makers must reinvent their strategic frameworks, governments must reinvent their trade policy strategies, and consumers will be impacted by those decisions over the coming years. The ramifications of this conflict will have enduring consequences, fundamentally transforming the future character of economic relations between the United States, Mexico, and the international community in general. Mexico and America's struggle for the automobile industry has assumed a life of its own, beyond and above the mere economic realities, a watershed in the shifting of global economic power. It goes far beyond factory floors and assembly lines, affecting diplomatic relations, corporate long-term planning, and North American geopolitical balance. As tensions continue to simmer, multinationals are drawing up contingency plans, such as the diversification of supply chain networks across continents, to minimize exposure to future vulnerability risk. Southeast Asian and East European nations, long keen to attract auto manufacturing investment, are marketing themselves as alternative production bases, further reshaping the competitive landscape of global business. In the United States, the prolonged duration of this crisis has led political leaders to doubt the viability of aggressive protectionist policies. The recognition that economic interdependence is not so readily unraveled without apocalyptic costs is informing broader trade strategy discussions. Concurrently, the success of Mexico in leveraging its status as a base for factories has provided it greater leverage at the bargaining table in international forums, demonstrating that smaller economies can be confident in standing firm against titans when holding dominance over meaningful segments of the supply chain. The ambiguity that still pervades the issue of the trade war points to a harsh reality. Economic wars in the contemporary era are no longer waged using weapons, but through the instrumentality of supply chain manipulation, and disruption is fast becoming the most potent weapon in this war. The world is watching, knowing full well that that the ultimate result will shape global business models for generations to come. The crisis is also extending its reach beyond economic terms, impacting public opinion and political landscapes. Consumers are increasingly frustrated with inflated vehicle prices and reduced product choice availability, and auto manufacturers are faced with increasing financial losses and declining investor confidence. Diplomats are racing against the clock as they seek to broker a settlement, aware that prolonged uncertainty can permanently redefine North America's trade profile. Mexico's new bargaining leverage is reorienting future talks, demonstrating the efficacy of astute economic retaliatory actions. The US government, for its own part, is being compelled to reconcile its protectionism with the hard realities of international supply chain interdependence. Whatever the ultimate outcome is, it will certainly open deep wounds in international trade policy frameworks. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments section below. See you in our next video. Bye-bye.